thank you to all of you for being here. I think it's a wonderful morning outside, but it's also nice and cool inside, so it's quite cozy. And of course, thank you once again for letting us have this event here. Maybe it's the first time that we have an event about science, art, in this church. I'm pretty sure for centuries this is the first time that's happening, so I think it's in a way quite special. Our second session is, we're going to discuss a few other topics that, but in a way I think that we're going to touch in many ways what João presented in the first session. This idea of how physical space can be seen as part of humanity, and how humanity has been dealing with the idea of space that is public, but also a space that in a way you cannot access. Of course, the title of my talk, the first talk, is a bit provocative, and I'll get there. But you'll see that it's quite harmless in many ways. I'll start with a story. It's a story that I like to tell because I think it's a story that tells us a lot about this idea of perception of our physical space. This is an image. This is not an image. It's actually a photo from a rock art in the northern part of Portugal. It's called Pala Pinta. It's pretty much just a small cave, quite open, where you can have some rock art that is around 7,000 years old. So it's not so old like the ones that we have here at the Coa Valley, but it's still very old. But this is a quite interesting one. We are looking at, here you can see this pala, this cave, and when you look in detail, you see some images. Can you recognize some of these images? Can you imagine what is the representation that our ancestors were trying to represent in these rocks? In a way, touching again what João was saying, trying to bring something that they saw and they're trying to represent in the public space for every one of their communities. What do you think you can see here? What is this image over here? The sun. Looks pretty much the sun. If you are a kid and you ask, can you draw a sun? Most probably they'll do something like this, right? What about this one? The second sun, a moon. But there's something strange happening with this second image here. You see this guy, you see kind of something coming out from this sun. And it's a comet, most probably a comet, we don't know. But actually there was a group of archaeologists working together with astronomers in Coimbra that they look in more detail and they try to see if there's around the time that this was represented, there was a comet or not in the sky. And they found a comet, doesn't matter the name. For the ones that you don't know, I'm an astronomer, but I know that there's a lot of you that here that are not astronomers. Comets are this kind of small compared with planets, quite small compared with planets objects. They orbit around the sun with a quite periodic orbits, so they come closer to the sun, and sometimes they come closer also to Earth, so we can see them, and they create this kind of almost like a tail of dust coming from comets. I'll explain a bit more later on. But a comet during the night sky can look something like this. So you see like something bright, and then you see some tails coming out of it. And most probably that's what actually our ancestors saw. They saw a comet in the sky and they tried to represent it in a public space. And it's this idea of interpretation, this idea of trying to understand more about the place where we live and the place that we have to, in a way, also try to understand. What I find fascinating about this story is that after 7,000 years, we managed to go to a comet, to build a machine, we humans, putting together technology, ideas, knowledge, and building a machine to actually study a comet. A couple of years ago, more than a couple now, but some years ago, this mission from the European Space Agency, which also Portugal belongs to, because I think connects more with the story, built a spacecraft to go to a comet, to try to land on the comet, to study the composition of the comet, to try to actually even understand why do we have life in our planet. So I think it's a kind of an interesting story of human knowledge and human ambition to know more about where we live. And the comet, this is the Rosetta comet, Churyumov-Gerasimenko. And this comet was observed through this mission. We have very detailed data about this comet. We know quite well its composition now. We also know that it's not this type of comet that brought water to our planet, because that's one of the main things that we're trying to find. But we learn a lot from this mission. And some images. There's also an attempt, in a way failed to land on the comet, but they managed to get some images. And you see it's very rocky. It almost feels alien and familiar at the same time. What's interesting about all this science is actually the European Space Agency produced a movie, a science fiction movie. And I don't know if you have seen this movie. It's called Ambition. And it's ambition because of this idea of the ambition of humans to know more about our own origins. And actually one of the producers of the movie is here, Jan Pomierny, almost is outside, of course, because there's no internet inside, that's why. And it's actually starring some quite famous actors. And this connects very much with João, what he was saying in the beginning, this idea that we produce all this knowledge to go to a comet, but we have to make a popular science fiction movie to make it relevant for the masses. It's quite interesting, right? So in a way, and this is again to set the scene, in a way is this idea that we want to go to places to be something special. That's why we do tourism, and this session is about ecotourism. And astrotourism is this idea that we go to places to have a unique experience, but then in a way, then we just have these masses of people everywhere we go in places that they are kind of part of our cultural heritage and sometimes world heritage. However, this is our dream, right? This is what we want to do, is to go to a place just by ourselves, just go for a walk, enjoy the landscape, being alone in a place to be ours. I think astrotourism, and I'll explain what's astrotourism, this idea of ecotourism, and this is definition, the dictionary or Wikipedia, is this idea that you can visit fragile, pristine, and relatively undisturbed natural areas, where you go to a place that there's not that many people, that is very pristine, very unique, and this idea about visiting that. And astronomy could play a big role on providing experience in this sense. I think astronomy, and you can see a lot of ecotourism images, they present the night sky as part of that uniqueness. And I think they present the night sky as part of that uniqueness because we lost this connection with the night sky. How many of you have seen the Milky Way in all its splendor in the night sky? It's like, okay, 50%, maybe less, maybe 30%. And I know because most of you live in cities. In the cities, you don't look up. You might recognize the moon. I'm sure that you see some stars, but you don't even know their names. But our ancestors, they have this connection with the sky, like I presented in the beginning. And I say that half of nature is actually at dark, right? This idea that we go for ecotourism to see waterfalls, these beautiful trees, the beautiful rock formations, going for a hike, but then we forget that the night sky is actually a very important natural heritage that belongs to all of us, and in a way we lost that connection. This is a picture from Alqueva, and we're going to have from the Alqueva region in Alentejo, beautiful night sky with some of the human buildings, cultural heritage. And in the United States, they have been thinking a lot about how can they make national parks more appealing for night sky observation. And that idea of half of the park is after dark, that's where I got inspiration for the others. But they've been promoting this idea, come to these unique places to see again the Milky Way, because we lost that connection. How can we observe the Milky Way? That is our own galaxy, that sometimes we don't even realize that we live in a galaxy. So these are some of the posters to promote that kind of sense of exploration of our place in the universe. So when I think about astronomy and ecotourism, I can think about different dimensions. I'll just briefly talk about them because I think in the next two speakers, they're going to touch this. So to kind of course, the very easy one is to give the right tools, like telescopes, but also training to people that run ecotourism facilities to do stargazing. They can show the stars, the planets, explain why it's important to know them, what is the Milky Way, what is an exoplanet, what is a constellation, etc. So people can really enjoy the dark sky. We're going to have a talk also about astrotourism in Japan, which is quite massive. This is a beautiful festival in the island of Tanegashima, actually the island where the Portuguese arrived many centuries ago, and they have the Space Launch Center there. And it's a very rural area, but they have this beautiful art and space festival and in this island. We could also run citizen science projects where the public could participate in scientific matters, in helping us with observations during meteor showers, variability of stars, etc. There's some project that could be done. There's also a lot of cultural heritage around the sky, because before people, as we could see it, had a much closer connection with that, like legends, local stories, etc. And going back to this idea of the common heritage, and touches again this idea of commons. There's this initiative from UNESCO that's called the Starlight, and the declaration to access to the night sky, because every single human should have access to the night sky as a common heritage of everyone. So they've been promoting a lot this idea. There are some parks that they are like national parks that they are protected under this convention. And because it comes from really this idea that we live now in cities. As you know, most of the population, they're going to live in the next decades in very, very big metropolis, very big cosmopolitan centers, and we're going to lose access to the night sky. We know also for astronomy research is a big problem, but also for life, biodiversity, the amount of insects, the amount of birds that are killed every year from artificial light is a big problem. And we need to create almost this oasis of darkness so life can also be protected. And I think there's a very nice combination of working with national parks and the protection of the dark skies. Also maritime animals or like these turtles get affected by light. And there's even a lot of research that shows that artificial light, if you are exposed to artificial light constantly, you can have some very serious health issues. There's a lot of research on that, serious research on that, and it's actually a big problem. So we know that access to darkness is important, and we know that also in the future, more and more of our society will look for that darkness and will look for those bubbles of darkness that we need to have in our lives. This is actually a picture here in the Coa Valley, where most of the visits to the rock art is done at night. So there's already kind of an opportunity to start doing more of ecotourism here. So to finish, I guess what I would like to discuss with some of you, and I think we need to have a lot of views from people from outside astronomy and tourism as well, is how can we use this aspect of beauty, also the aesthetics, the artistic aspect of the night sky to support the development of local tourism, sustainable tourism in these regions. I think for us, we need to think a bit more about it and how to do it in a very nice, inclusive way. And so that's why we put together this session, and we're going to have two talks, and then I think we're going to have some time for discussion as well. So I guess that's my introduction. And I'll ask Agata-san to prepare, but meanwhile, I'll be happy to answer one or two questions. Thank you. Any questions or comments?
How do you think we could prevent ecotourism from becoming mass tourism and ruining all these beautiful oases, bubble, dark places, as you call them?
I guess that I'm not an expert on the topic, but that's one of the discussion points that I think we need to have here, because we understand that tourism has been important for economical development in Portugal, especially in the last years, and I think it can be also quite important for this region. So we need to find the right balance, and maybe some of the examples that we have from Alqueva can be a good example of what can be done in Portugal. So I'm very curious about that. Do you mind to just?
So if we are here to talk about new futures or new ways of organizing ourselves, why do we have to still concentrate on cities if we can do most of our work online? And maybe that would be a way to not lose the dark and actually spread it to everyone, if everyone would live more scarcely around the globe, I think.
Yeah, I guess that's also a very important, very interesting point. I mean, I think there's two schools on that, and I'm not like an expert. We have Pedro from Rewilding Europe that I'm sure that can answer that question, but much better than I do. There's this school that we need to have a more distributed population across the territory. So we can also, of course, we need people to develop local economy, right? Without people, there's no economy, there's no jobs, there's no opportunities for young people, there's no money flowing. However, there's also this other school that said maybe we should concentrate everyone in cities and leave the rest for nature, and nature just can have a great time in the rest. So it's like this idea, and I don't know, they are almost contradictory. So we need maybe to understand what would be the best model to have. And I'm not sure. I don't know, Pedro, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think it's important to balance the space and between this differentiation of use. I mean, usually when we think about people in the territories, they're mostly there for extractive reasons. They are doing farming or mining or forestry, and this is conflicting with having space for nature to develop. If we can find the balance to have people present in these spaces without extractive needs, and this also comes to the point of distributing and alimentation, food distribution and resource distribution. It's a very complicated matter to think so simply of just bringing people to this landscape or reserve this landscape for nature or even for other purposes. So in a way, the question is much deeper than just simply developing territories through making people come back. And I think that's one of the questions that during the StixCamp we can reflect upon. And all contributions, of course, it's important to raise the question and to develop it further. I hope I did some answer to your question. And help you, Pedro, but it's a very complex issue.
But I'm sure you're going to have time to discuss that during the next two or 3 days. So let's move on to the next talk.